Good morning, everybody. Today we're going to start looking at the causes of World War I and what events led the United States to become involved. And we're going to jump right into the juicy stuff, beginning with the... All right, so looking at the technology, so this was kind of sometimes referred to as one of the first mechanized war because there was such a heavy emphasis placed on machines and technology and the role they played in the war. So long-range artillery, poison gas, tanks, airplanes, but definitely one of the more impactful was the use of U-boats, which is particularly going to be the Germans. All right, an easy way to remember that is U stands for underwater. Okay, these were submarines, and they were used to sink trade ships or battleships or cruisers, things like that. So it became really a scary concept because at any time you didn't know where the enemy was. All right, they didn't have the technology we have today. The use of radar or sonar to try and find out, all right, where the enemy is. This time, I want you to pause it. Right, and flip back through if you need, but I want you to look at, answer this key question for the first part. Right, what events and factors helped cause World War I? Right, continuing, now we're going to look at how the United States gets involved in World War I. Right, here's Woodrow Wilson down here. He's president at the beginning, at the outbreak of World War I, and at all costs, he wants to keep the United States neutral. He doesn't want to rope the United States into a European affair. Right, because if you think back to the last chapter, we have enough going on in the Western Hemisphere. We don't need to get involved in what's going on the Eastern in the Eastern Hemisphere. Now, don't even start to ask me about the bear down here. I thought it was cool. I thought it was relevant, and it just popped up, so I decided to stick it in there. All right, but neutrality, that's the idea that you're refusing to take a side in a conflict. All right, George Washington, when he left office, he encouraged the United States to remain neutral in worldwide affairs. Right, sometimes we do, sometimes we don't, but the United States definitely, in this case, wanted to stay neutral. Right, now, as the war began, right, the United States actually, the economy actually did really well. We traded with both sides. Right, our economy was very strong. We were making lots of war goods, selling it to both sides. Right, I have a graph on the next slide that's going to look at the balance of trade that we have. All right, so my question to you is, just how neutral was the United States during World War I? This is showing the amount of trade that we did with both sides. All right, the Allied powers, right, also referred to as the Triple Entente, and the Central powers, also referred to as the Triple Alliance. All right, so you can see this is showing us millions of dollars. So in 1914, right, we did trade valued at $785 million of trade with the Allies, and $370 million of trade with the Central powers. So did we favor one side over the other? Yes, but we still traded with both sides, right? And then if you look at 1 year later, we're now $1.3 billion of trade with the Allies and only $30 million of trade with the Central powers. And then by 1916, the year before we enter the war, we're $2.5 billion of trade with the Allies and only $300,000 of trade. So does this chart support us being neutral, or does it go against us being neutral? It goes against us being neutral. Okay, the next thing that leads to the United States, kind of along the path of the United States entering World War I, is the sinking of the Lusitania. Now, this was a British passenger ship, all right, that as a result of the fighting going on in World War I, that a German U-boat sank, right, on its way to back to Great Britain. Now, the problem here is that of the 1,198 people that were on the ship when it sank, okay, 128 of them were Americans. So the response here was that after the sinking of the Lusitania, right, the American people are now going to want to get involved and declare war on Germany and enter the war on the side of Great Britain, Russia, and France. Now, this was a newspaper ad or a poster that was run in the newspapers, right, by the Imperial German Embassy. So Germany's the country that wrote this, right? And if you want to pause it and read through it more carefully, we'll look at it a little bit in class, right? It was just simply a warning that Germany was giving to the United States in particular and other countries around the world that any people traveling on a ship of Great Britain, right, was doing so at their own risk. Now, if you look at the date, April 22nd, 1915, right, this warning was issued almost a month before the sinking of the Lusitania, right? So when you start thinking about what event occurred soon thereafter, it was the sinking of the Maine. And then just a couple images of U-boats at work. Like I told you, it was kind of scary because you couldn't see the enemy. Whereas in a war, right, you're in a trench warfare, the enemy is just across the way. With U-boats, okay, you couldn't see where the enemy was. While many people wanted to declare war on Germany after the sinking of the Lusitania, right, Wilson still wanted to make sure that the United States stayed neutral. All right, and they met with the German ambassador. Germany promised to halt unrestricted submarine warfare, meaning they weren't going to sink any more trade ships or passenger ships. But then when Germany started to realize that they needed that wild card, that weapon of the U-boats, right, they then resumed unrestricted submarine warfare. All right, which then is going to make the United States angry. Okay. Another event kind of along the way to the United States getting involved was the Zimmermann telegram. All right, now these are two countries. This is a political cartoon published right shortly before the United States gets involved. Okay, this guy symbolizes Germany, and this guy symbolizes Mexico. You can tell by the giant sombrero. All right, now what Germany wanted to do was they had a feeling that the United States was getting closer and closer to entering World War I. Right, so they tried to get Mexico to declare war on the United States in order to kind of distract the United States. So the German ambassador, his name was Zimmermann, okay, he sends a telegram to Mexico. It's intercepted by Great Britain, right, and Great Britain, of course, sends it to the United States, right, and as a result, the United States now asks for a declaration of war against Germany. So the reasons why the U.S. gets involved, right, it's because of submarine warfare, but then kind of just one to kind of push us over the edge here was the Zimmermann telegram. All right, the last thing I want to look at is the revolution in Russia. All right, Russia actually leaves the war before it's over. It goes through a political revolution. Communists in Russia are going to overthrow the country, right, and then shortly after they're going to sign a treaty with Germany to effectively exit the war. This is important because I'll show you a map on the next slide, right? Germany doesn't have to worry about fighting troops on its eastern border anymore. It can focus its full attention on France and Great Britain. Now, at this time, right, when Russia leaves, the Allies, Great Britain and France, are desperately in need of the United States. They're suffering heavy losses. The tide has turned against them. They really need the United States to get involved and join the war. So we'll finish off here with this little map. All right, this is the map from the beginning. Russia now leaves the war. Germany can send whatever troops it had fighting Russia. It can rush them immediately to the Western Front to fight against France and Great Britain. So at this point, they desperately need the United States to get involved and send troops, right? And the United States does oblige and enter the war. So the final key question I want you to think about is what events brought the United States into World War I? Right, pause it if you need to, go back through, look through your notes, right? That's your key question for that last section.